Hello guys, welcome to the Fasting Feel Good podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Stephanie.
It's really easy to say, okay, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to do it by fasting. We're excited to start. We have the dopamine. But then like 2-3 weeks into it, you're like, ugh, this is the worst. Like, this is not working. It's not doing fast enough. It takes a lot longer than we all want.
She's a chiropractor with a background in psychology and neuroscience. She's also the author of The Betty Body and the host of Better with Dr. Stephanie, a podcast that centers on the ideas of always trying to be better than the day before. So today we're going to talk about fasting for women, and the importance of a holistic health. So let's get started and get right into it. Hey Stephanie, how are you doing?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here.
Great, lovely to have you here, and really excited to get things going and talking more about fasting, and especially fasting for women. A huge part of our mission in fasting is to make fasting personalized. So everybody in our community should obviously feel picked up for where they are at right now in their journey. And that's something I know you touched on a lot as well with your work. So how to make fasting work for you, especially when it comes to being a woman. And of course, we want to support our women in the fasting family. So it will be great to dive into that topic. But first off, I would love if you could explain, what does Betty mean? And how do you let this idea guide you through your life?
Oh, sure. Yeah. What a great question. So as you mentioned, I'm a podcast host myself. It's called Better with Dr. Stephanie. And we started calling the fans of the Better show our Bettys. And when I looked up the word Betty, so if you go to urbandictionary.com, it's a website that has a lot of, modern day slang in it, right? So if you look up the word Betty on urbandictionary.com, I'm paraphrasing, but it says something like, a Betty is a modern day queen. She's intelligent, she's quirky, she's loving, she's driven. And the description, it goes on, but I remember reading it and saying, oh, that's who I am. I'm quirky, I'm loving, I'm intelligent, I'm always trying to be the best version of myself. And that's also the type of woman that I want to serve, the type of woman that I want to empower to make better decisions for herself and for her family. We know that women are the primary decision makers in the home, usually when it comes to health decisions. So whether that's their children, the food that comes into the house, the exercises that they engage in, etc. So Betty just stuck. And when I think about being a Betty, this is highly individual. So that might mean for one person, becoming stronger in their weight regimen. That might be, reaching a strength goal. It might be losing weight. It might be increasing their fasting tolerance. It might be just being happy in their body, whatever size it is. So the book is called The Betty, the book that I wrote is called The Betty Body, but it's really size agnostic. It doesn't really have to do with being a size 2 or being a size 4. Those are also arbitrary anyway. It's about a woman feeling great in her body, no matter what size it is, being metabolically healthy, strong, both from a mental perspective, like having mental grit and mental resilience, but also from a physiological perspective, having cellular grit and physiological resistance. So that's what a Betty is. It's sort of a combination of, mind and body, and really working towards self-actualization, being the best version of yourself in whatever that means to you. So the definition is very fluid, and it can really be adapted for, the individual.
Oh, that sounds awesome. So everyone's got their unique path, right? And They just create their temple or their home, and whatever that is, not just looking good, but like you said, also feeling good and being happy with yourself. I think that's definitely very encouraging and a nice way. And I'm sure that a lot of women have gone a long way with this. So I love the approach. I also like the that you be better than you were yesterday, than the day before. I've seen that you talk about that a lot. And I would love to hear some tips or some advice you can share with our listeners on how to actually be better than you were the day before.
Yeah. And actually, the name is very intentional. So I didn't call it the best podcast. It wasn't like you have to be number one. It's about better. And it's really this ode to it's not the destination, it's the journey. Like, yes, winning, the medal, the gold medal, everyone, there's that glory, but you also want to be thinking about how do you get to being and like, how do you get to be the best? It's this idea that every single day you're looking at who you are today and you're looking to the future, looking where you are right now and saying, what are the next steps that I need to do? So for a lot of women, and my audience tends to be female. I have men as well. And of course we love our beautiful men, and we love everybody, who wants to listen to the podcast and to consume my work. But one of the things that I have really come to understand is, as much as I like to geek out on physiology, and I know we're going to talk about physiology today, we're going to talk about fasting for women and all the metabolic advantages that confers. One of the things that I have found to be very true is you can do all of those things, but if you hate yourself, right? If you have a mindset or, as a friend of mine, Philip McKernan, might say, your soul set. If you are not happy with who you are, you can talk all about longevity and living a long life, but it's all for naught if you don't love who you are. And so a lot of the work that I try to do is I try to blend a lot of the physiology. Like, here's, these are some of the benefits fasting for women. These are some of the things that we can consider, whether it's your menstrual cycle or your hormonal composition. And I know we'll get into that. But I also like to blend that with, how do you actually feel about yourself? How do you divorce yourself in a way from a society that has really taught most women to always be unhappy with who they are, that they always need to buy, the mascara that's going to attract the guy, or the purse, or the this or the that. So in terms of advice, I would say one of the things that I think is really important is to get to know yourself. And I know that that's a bit vague, but understand where you come from. So do we have, and everybody has this, do we have traumas or experiences, negative or positive, in the past that have shaped who we are today? When we are in conflict, for example, with a partner or a family member, friend, coworker, how do we get activated? Do we get defensive? Do we go on the attack? Understanding some of your patterns, I think, is really important, because that allows you to begin to, first you have this awareness of yourself and your patterns, but then you can also begin to heal it. Because if we are completely unaware of how we react in a stressful situation, you're never going to be able to modify it. So my first tip, although it's quite vague, would be to just start paying attention to how you might react or become activated or triggered in situations that might be stressful to you. Do you snap? Do you disassociate? Do you verbally shut down? Do you need to leave the room? Are you screaming? Are you, what is happening? And then a technique or a practice that I've recently adopted, which I find to be incredibly powerful, is something called conscious self-forgiveness. So let's say you and I, Phil, we have an argument about something, and I don't like the way that I showed up in that argument. Afterwards, when when the emotions and the anger and the stress hormones have sort of drained, to be able to reflect on how I, may have misstepped, or how I may have said something that I didn't want to say. And then to say, okay, I forgive myself for, I'm just making an example, for yelling at Phil, or for saying such and such to Phil. The truth of the matter is, I was being activated because that's what I was taught as a child. So there's sort of these two pieces to it, where it's, I forgive myself for the thing that I didn't like. And then the truth of the matter is, and then you acknowledge to yourself why that may have happened. And I think that movement, or that inching towards self-forgiveness and self-awareness, I think is one of the biggest gifts, man or woman, what you can give yourself. Because so often we are, we're unconscious, right? It's like, okay, I got to lose the weight. I got to do this. I got to do that. And it's all done from this punitive negative, like I have to look a certain way. I have to look like I'm 25 forever. I have to look like I have to have a 26-inch waist or whatever it is. But I think that really coming into your own and really loving who you are and all of the all the light but all the darkness as well, I think will serve you and just your, in your life. And, at the risk of sounding trite, I think we're here once, right? Like it's not a rehearsal. Like we're here one time, right? And I think the whole pandemic has really highlighted that for many, many people worldwide, where it's like, okay, what's really important here? So that would be my kind of first tip. And then of course, moving into some of the physiological realm is like understanding what you want to do. So a lot of women will come to me for weight loss. They'll say, I've had kids and, maybe I'm 42 or 55, whatever it is. And I just can't seem to lose that last 10 to 15 pounds. So understanding why you want to lose those pounds. Is it, to give you more energy to keep up with your kids? Is it, maybe you're a grandmother and you want to be able to take care of your grandchildren? Is it flexibility? Is it strength? Like, really piecing apart what the goal is and then holding on to that, because it's really easy to start something like in fact, it's really easy to say, okay, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to do it by fasting. And we're excited to start. We have the dopamine. We have all these neurotransmitters that are like driving us to pursue this goal. But then like 2-3 weeks into it, you're like, ugh, this is the worst. Like I'm bored. Like I need to, this is not working. It's not doing fast enough. So, coming back to the original reason why you started is so important to keep you tethered to that goal, because most goals, whether it's weight loss, hormone balancing, fertility, whatever it is, it takes a lot longer than we all want. Like we all want to do it. True. And next week we have the beach body. We all want to do it. And then 2 weeks from now, it's all done. It takes many months, in some cases, many years, to fulfill, to make good on that initial goal. So understanding your why before you sort of set out to it, I think is really important too.
Well, yeah, definitely makes sense. And what I really like about that as well is like, you're not comparing yourself to others, right? You focus on yourself and your needs and your desires, like you said, your why, but also not really being that hard on yourself. Like, of course, we're all humans. We're not perfect and we can mess up sometimes, right? And it's like you said, so important to know, where do you want to go? What are your goals? And especially your goals, not goals from other people, right? Like, I totally agree. Like, a lot of people are often on autopilot. I used to be like that when I was younger as well, just chasing after some goals. When I really reflected, hey, are they really my goals, or am I doing it for someone else? And things like that are never sustainable, right? Because it's not, it doesn't come really intrinsic. And I really love that aspect as well of like self-awareness, going in deeper inside and looking at your roots. Where do you come from and why are you triggered because of certain things? Because we all carry a story and a certain background in us. I'm totally with you on that. Like when it comes to like comparing to others, or let's say competition, I know that you used to compete in physique competitions too, right?
Correct. Yes. So I was in a class called Figure. So it's, maybe a step above, so bikini, there's figure, and then there's bodybuilding. So bikini, you tend not to see as much muscle development. Figure, there tends to be, a moderate amount of muscle development. And then bodybuilding, as you might expect, is like, a lot of muscle development. So it was sort of in the middle. And even to compete, in something like that, it was a multi-month, it was, I think I was in preparation mode for about 9 months. It was my first first one, like my first competition. So I wanted to build up the muscle. And then of course, if anybody's competed, about, peak month and peak week where you're really calorically restrictive. And then there's, some not necessarily healthy practices around like water restriction, to try and get the subcutaneous water drained so that you look good on stage for the competition day. So yeah, competed there, learned a lot about myself. I think a lot of times when we engage in like a big lofty goal, right? So in this case, it might be figure competition, for a listener, it might be losing weight, or it could be in any realm. It could be getting really good grades in school. It could be saving up for a down payment. We often think that the achievement of the goal is going to be much shorter than what it actually is. And you really it's easy, like I was saying, to start in the middle where you sort of don't know which, like you're sort of far enough away from the start goal, but you're far away enough from the end goal that's usually where a lot of things fall apart. And there was times when I felt like I wasn't making progress fast enough. I wasn't getting my strength, the strength gains that I was looking for fast enough. I wasn't seeing the muscles develop. And, it takes a lot of courage to say, this is something that's really important to me and I'm going to keep going. It's a lot easier to throw in the towel and say, well, this didn't work for me, right? Because it's so much more threatening, right? To the ego for you to continue with the possibility of failure. So yeah, it was a great experience. I don't know that I'd do it again, just because of, like I mentioned, like the water restriction and all the stuff that you have to do to get on stage. But like 90% of it was like clean eating, lifting, and getting new PRs, like, personal best, personal records on, strength gains. But yeah, it was a great experience, and I'm very proud of I came in third. I was living in the States, the United States at the time.
Third place.
Third place, yeah. So I have my,
Nice.
it's actually just behind, my trophy's just behind this camera. But yeah, I'm proud of it. It was something like it was on my bucket list, followed through on it, and
Cool.
did it.
Yeah, good on you, and definitely something to be proud of. Like, I have a lot of respect for things like that as well. I had a few friends who did, who competed as well in bodybuilding, so I know what they went through as well. And like I said, it takes so much discipline and commitment. I've got a lot of respect for that, and I think it can be very demanding mentally as well, right? Like, if I
Yes.
look back at the time with my friends, how they were, especially when it came to that phase just before the show, with drinking so much water, for example. I don't know how much they drank. Like, that must have been, I don't know how many liters per day, like 10 liters. I'm
It
not
was about
too sure.
10. Yeah, it was about 10, for the Americans who were listening, about 10 gallons, for everyone else, about 10 liters a day. And then about, call it, 24 to 36 hours before the show, like, you completely cut all the water out. And nobody do this at home. Like, do not try this at home. It's awful.
I just wanted to say,
Yeah, it's
let's
awful.
not recommend this
we are not
to our
recommending this.
community.
No, but that's how so your body's like, oh, there's all this water coming in. I'm just going to continue to like get rid of. And then, this 24-hour to 36-hour period before the show, you just completely have no water. Maybe like
How did you feel then? Like, that must have been.
It wasn't great. I mean, I was very thirsty. I was having dreams of watermelon. So I was dreaming of like, very heavy water content foods. I also had, I think I had maybe a sweet potato or something like that to like, the day, like to just absorb even more water. So I was really dehydrated. Looked great on stage, but but it's not a healthy, you may have, we may have looked good, but it wasn't
Okay.
It wasn't healthy. And, the first thing that I did, after the judge, like there was two parts, like the morning part was the actual judging. And then the evening was like the show where everyone comes and whatever. So as soon as the show was done, like the second part, it was like, I want watermelon, I want water. And I just drank, right? And then of course it's gone, right? Like in an hour, you're like, man, like I can't, like I had like striations in my shoulder. You could see anytime I moved my shoulder, you could kind of see the muscle contraction. And within an hour, drinking water, it was like your body just is like, oh my God. So you can't see it anymore. So whenever you see things in magazines where you see people like completely shredded, they've prepared for that photo shoot. Like they have water restricted.
Yes.
So that's not a natural way for a man or a woman to be. And I'll also just throw this in here. My menstrual cycle. So I got down to, I think it was like 8-point-something% body fat for the show, which is for a woman, like so low for a woman. So I was amenorrheic, didn't have my period for a couple months leading up to the show. And then after the show, it was so like the 3 to 4 months afterwards, my cycle was just a gong show. It was, lots of cramping, lots of irregularities, all the things. And I'm a very competitive person. So I was like, I'm going to do the show and I'm going to, so I got down to like an incredibly low weight, but it wasn't in terms of body fat. But as women, we actually need a certain amount of fat to
Yes.
have a menstrual cycle. And for women in their reproductive years, this is a, I talk about this on the podcast, talked about this in the book. This is a vital sign, right, for women. So in the same way that, if I were to say to you, Phil, let's take a look at your heart rate, let's take a look at your respiratory rate, let's take a look at your, blood pressure. These are vital signs. For a woman, one of the additional vital signs is the integrity of her menstrual cycle. So does she have cramping? Does she experience PMS? What does her bleed week look like? And we can get into these things if you like or not, but just know that for a woman, you need a certain amount of body fat in order for you to ovulate, to release the egg, which is actually the point of a menstrual cycle. It's not just to have a period, which everyone, we all know when we're on our period, but like for women, the point of your menstrual cycle is to ovulate. And so if you don't have enough fat, your body's going to say, listen, like this is dangerous. I can't have you pregnant if there's not enough fat to feed the baby, right? So you will lose your period. You will lose your ability to ovulate when your body fat percentage is low. And you see that in a lot of female athletes, actually. You'll see whether it's competing in the competing world or it's in professional sport, where they are so lean that they often are amenorrheic. They don't have a regular cycle.
Wow. Yeah, that is very interesting. Of course, I'm not a woman, but the majority of our community is female. So it's definitely interesting to hear about that, and having an expert like yourself talking about it. I mean, you've probably learned so much through that competition as well. Like I said, I don't want to knock it. I've got huge respect for it, but probably change your perspective and your opinion on health in general as well, right? Of course, like you said, the training and the clean eating, that's good, but going to such an extreme for that show, and then maybe even having very subjective opinions of judges, right?
Correct.
One judge can say, hey, it's good. The other one says, no, it's not.
Right.
Like, that's probably, I can just imagine how that must feel for you. I mean, you did really well. You came in third, but like that must have changed a lot, right? Like like I said, the opinion on health in general. Did you question that afterwards?
Absolutely. Well, even if you look at, so afterwards, so I competed in the National Physique Committee, so the NPC. And afterwards, you get a copy of the judges' scorecards of you. So, which is, I don't know if that's really great for mental health, but we still got them, right? So, there were some judges that thought I should have been first, and there were just as many judges that thought I should have been fifth. So it's completely subjective. So some people thought I was the winner. Some people thought I should have done more. I should have ranked lower than what I did. And then the majority was sort of like threes, like, twos and threes. And then I think it averaged out to like third place. So talking about subjectiveness, like for as long as I have, been concerned with, the exterior or how I look, that the ideal female body is always changing. So when I was younger, in grade 7, grade 8, grade 9, grade 10, there was the rise of the supermodels. So there was the Kate Moss, and at the time there was this sort of grunge. I'm totally dating myself now, but there's sort of this like grunge movement, at least in North America, where women were praised for being very slim, very skinny, the thigh gap, right? Like to make sure that your thighs didn't touch, to sort of have this waif-like appearance. And now, and so when I was young, I was like, man, I'm never going to look like that. Like my background is, I'm part Portuguese, part Lebanese. Like I'm a very curvy, naturally person. My legs, my thighs touch, but now you fast forward to now, and we see a lot that body ideal has completely shifted, right? Now we see the Kim Kardashians and the Beyoncés and the J-Los, who like, J-Lo, I remember when I was young, and I remember first seeing her on stage, I was like, oh my God, she's like the first person that looks like me, like the first person I'd ever seen on television that was like kind of a bit darker and like curvier and stuff. But now it's like this really curvy, big booty kind of body ideal. And I think for women, it's a never ending target, right? So you can try so hard to look like Kate Moss, and then it flips, and now it's like, now you got to get butt implants, right? So it's like, you can never win. So the best thing that you can do as a woman is to say, okay, I honor all these shapes and sizes, like the Kate Moss to the Jennifer Lopez, and I'm just going to do me. Like, I'm just going to be the best version of myself. Because if you get the butt implants and you do all the glute exercises, like in 5-10 years, like that's not going to be in vogue anymore. That's not going to be the ideal. There's going to be something else that comes. And that's actually just been more of a lifelong observation, because I remember just totally not fitting into the waif look. And now, the way that I look is much more, celebrated, or, the curviness, whatever. But I also understand that is also transient. Like, there's going to be something else that comes that's more, that becomes the ideal, that becomes the standard of beauty. And those things always change. So as a woman, no matter what you look like, just do you, just do the best version of you. And you can incorporate the fasting, and you can incorporate the nutrition and the exercise. Just do the best version of you. Cause that's the sexiest, the most beautiful thing, that's around.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's just the thing, right? It changes throughout generations, and what is the ideal beauty? But at the end of the day, like you said yourself, like genetics play a big role as well. And it's just because, let's take a Kate Moss. Obviously, she's a beautiful lady, but everyone is beautiful in their own. Like, it's all individual beauty, and that's just so important to understand. I think it's just so confusing, and I find it then, of course, for men as well, like having a certain image to be shown. Okay, you have to be strong. If you're really thin, then you're not a real man. But especially for women, I can really understand how hard that must be, especially like growing up as a young girl and always being taught, okay, this is how you should look like, you should be pretty, and all these things. And it can obviously encourage young females to just have low self-esteem then, right? And that's just like what we try to tackle as well, and really find it important to give people individual guidance, but also educate them. There's so many myths out there, or just wrong advice, and that's where we just want to really educate and say, okay, what is health? Like, there's so many factors at the end of the day. It's not just physical, it's also mental factors as well, like you said as well before, and like not just looking good, but it's also about feeling good. And if you're not the ideal, then that's okay. You're still beautiful. It doesn't make you less beautiful. And you've got different beauties with what will come with you. And I think that's just so important to understand, right? Like I said, what is health? And health is, for me, not just the looks, but also your mind. Like, you have to have a healthy mind, and that just really plays a big part in what we try to do as well. Like, maybe touching on to fasting a bit as well. Like, well, when we say, okay, it's also giving your body rest, giving some time to rest. And what I've obviously discovered in my fasting journey as well was the mental benefits from it, and just seeing all these more focus, more energy. And that's what we really try to bring out there. Like, of course, like if you want to lose weight, that's totally fine, but it's more like a positive side effect. What we say with fasting, it's more about the health benefits, and just touching on that. I think it's so important to really, education is the key. And the more we do that, and like yourself, like people out there who really bring health to the world, not just physical but also mental, and help people like getting to know themselves, feeling beautiful, feeling good because they've deserved it. I think that's so important. But maybe just to touch on your personal fasting experience, like, do you fast regularly?
I do, yeah. And my fasting has really changed over many years. So when I first started fasting, we'll say probably now it's like 5-6 years ago, I was really into it. I was doing longer fasts. So I would, and this is part of the, origin story of the book as well. So I was pretending like I was a little man, so I would see people who were doing like 7-day fasts, 5-day fasts. And I'm like, I'm going to do that too. Like, I'm strong. I have the wherewithal. I have the mental, I'm going to do it. And so I was doing these long water fasts, and like you were saying, lots and lots of mental clarity. I did find that, the first, maybe 6 months, I would do one of these longer fasts like once a month. So at the end of the month, I would do like a 5-day, like a 3 to 5 day fast. And then I sort of noticed, somewhere in the 6 to 9 month mark of doing this very consistently, that the benefits started to diminish a little bit. So I was noticing day 3, day 4, I would have this brain fog. I didn't have this clarity of thought that I was enjoying before. And then I also started to, again, notice changes in my menstrual cycle. So if I did the 7-day fast, I may not have had, the length of, my bleed week was shorter, or the leading up to that first week of the menstrual cycle was much more difficult. And so I started paying attention with myself and also with my patients. At the time, I was running a nutrition program in my clinic. We were doing more of a ketogenic style, so like carbohydrate restricted diet. And we were also incorporating fasting. And I started just noticing for women where they were fasting in their cycle and how easy or difficult it was. And one of the patterns that emerged, and I also tracked with this really well, is that in the first 2 weeks of a woman's cycle, so there's sort of 2 main parts of a woman's cycle. We have the follicular phase, which is the first 2 weeks, and then the second 2 weeks is called the luteal phase, or the secretory phase. Okay. So in the follicular phase, so that includes your bleed week and then the week right before you ovulate, much easier for women to fast. So to do more of like the water fasting. So they could really engage in either like a 24-hour or even a multi-day fast, like maybe 36-hour, 48-hour, 72-hour, much easier to do in week 1 and 2 of their cycle. And then once the woman ovulated and she was in that luteal phase of her cycle, if she was a woman who tended to be more if she had PMS, or if she had digestive issues, or if she had any metabolic dysfunction, these last 2 weeks of her cycle, we would see more inflammation, like more evidence of inflammation. So like maybe her rings weren't, on her fingers as, getting on her fingers as easily. There was like the joints were swollen, or she was retaining water. Or she was having more like her bowel movements weren't as regular. Her sleep was more disturbed. She was noticing more like moodiness and irritability. If we were to implement a 24-hour, 48-hour fast in this time, it was much more difficult for her to complete. So her hunger signals were amplified. Her sleep was much more disturbed. There was all these other things. So I was like, oh, that's interesting. So we started playing with the types of fasts for women. So in that follicular phase, the first 2 weeks, water fasts are great. So if you're someone who already kind of fasts, and you want to play with maybe a longer fast, the first 2 weeks of your cycle as a woman is a great time to experiment. So if you're already maybe doing it's often called time restricted feeding or intermittent fasting, like where you're not changing so much what you're eating, you're just sort of limiting the time in which you eat the food. You can do that all through your cycle. But if you're like, I'd like to see what it's like to do, an OMAD, like a 1 meal a day. Like I'd like to try a 24-hour fast. The first 2 weeks of your cycle are an excellent time because you're just generally more resilient to more stressors here.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah. So that would be kind of my, that was like one thing that I noticed with my women. And so to answer your original question, I used to do these really long fasts, and now I've really moved into a place where I will typically do a TRE, like a time restricted eating schedule. I do that pretty much daily. And then I'll play with maybe longer fasts in that first 2 weeks. So I might do like a 24-hour, or I might do, a lot of times my TRE is like, 10-14 maybe. So it's like 14 hours of fasting, 10-hour eating window, or it could be a 16-8, that's really common as well. So 8 hours of an eating window, 16 hours of a fast, but I may like bump it up a notch. So instead of doing a 16-8, I might do an 18-6, or I might do like a 24-hour. So just eating like just at dinner time and then eating again, dinner time the next day. So that's how I typically fast now. And then when I'm in my luteal phase, or when my clients are in their luteal phase, I actually change the type of fasting. So I move away from like a water only fast and water, herbal tea, black coffee, And I'll move into, we were talking in the pre-chat about these fasting hotels and like how you get broth and stuff. So I will, give them more of a bone broth type of, so if they wanted to just restrict their calories during the day, they'll sip on bone broth or a type of, chicken broth or whatever through the day. So they're still getting some calories, they're getting some protein from the collagen and the things from the bone marrow, but it's not a pure fast, right? Like some fasting purists might say that's not a fast, but I consider that a fast. I consider that a caloric liquid fast. So you're still restricting your calories, and you're getting some liquid with some types of protein, a little bit of fat, that kind of thing.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. I would love to dive in a bit deeper, especially for our female listeners, because they will probably be very interested in what works best for you, but what advice you can give as well for actually starting out. And like we said before, like it's so individual, and you touched on it as well. Like women are not little men, like women are women, men are men. So obviously it's totally different, and you have to be aware of it, especially with including that with your cycle. That would definitely interest our listeners. So if you could elaborate on that a bit more, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. I think the number one rule for fasting, men, woman, anything in between, right, is when your body is telling you it's time to stop, you need to honor those signals. So if you are feeling lightheaded, or you're feeling brain foggy, or you're feeling like you might pass out, you need to get some food into your body. So that's the time to break the fast. And I was one of the people who was like, I was on the 7-day fast. It was like day 5, and I thought I was going to pass out. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. Do not do that. Honor what your body is telling you. So that's kind of number one. When you're starting off on your fasting journey, I really like to temper it. I like to start off slowly and improve and increase the tolerance for fasting over a long delta T, over a long period of time. If you were to go from like never fasting, and I was like, great, tomorrow you're not going to eat for 2 days. You're going to just jump into a 48-hour fast. You could probably do it, but you're going to hate it. It's going to feel awful.
Probably going to hate it, yes.
You're going to hate it. And then your likelihood of coming back to that practice in the future is very, very low. And definitely. One of the keys with fasting is that it's a practice that is easy and can fit into your lifestyle over the long term. That's actually how you reap the benefits. It's not the one time that you fast. It's the accruing and the accumulation of the benefits of fasting over time. So rule number one, as I said before, is if you're feeling lightheaded or you feel like you're going to eat. Rule number 2 is to just be gentle with yourself. Slowly work on increasing your tolerance. So a lot of times I'll counsel women, if they've never fasted before, I'll say, just start with a 12-12. Like, let's just do a 12-hour eating window and then a 12-hour complementary fast, 24 hours in a day, 12-12. So when you're thinking about how that might work, how that, that works in, the application of that, if you wake up, let's say 7, 8 in the morning, you have, your cup of coffee, your breakfast, whatever, that starts the clock, right? So that's when you break your fast. Maybe you have some eggs or bacon, whatever you're having. And then you have, let's say you start eating at 7 in the morning, you have until 7 in the evening to eat all your food, right? Really nice, long window. You have lots of time in there to allow for digestion and then come back to, your next meal. And then the 12 hours of fasting, the majority of that is while you're asleep, right? So hopefully most of you are sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. If you're not, that would be another really good tip for you in terms of, just
guilty
physiology
sometimes,
and
sometimes I don't
sometimes
get
life is like that, right? But 8 to 9 hours of your 12, now all that means is that maybe you're extending the time from the time of waking to when you eat, or ideally you're extending your last meal, so dinner, to when you go to sleep. And this is the work of Dr. Sachin Panda I believe it's at the Salk Institute, where he's done a lot of work on circadian fasting and the benefit of actually having your last meal, so your supper, your dinner, 2 to 3 hours at least between that meal and the time that you retire for bed. And what that allows for, of course, it allows the stomach to empty. It allows a good portion of the small intestines to absorb the bolus that you've had. Yeah. And it allows for a more restful sleep. A lot of times and I hear this a lot with the 16-8. So a lot of times people will say, well, I'll skip breakfast and I'll only start eating at noon. And that means that I can eat until 8 p.m. But if you're eating at 8 p.m. and then you're going to bed at 10, it's a little tight, right? We want to allow for that digestive system to clear. So starting off with a 12-12, super easy. And then I might get her to do that, 2-3 weeks, like until it's like just a non-issue. She's just doing it kind of naturally on her own. And then I might just tighten that window up a squeak. So instead of doing a 12-hour feeding window, it might be 10. So now instead of fasting for 12 hours, she's fasting for 14. And that is really nice. Those two, like the 12-12 and the 10-14, are really beautiful most of your cycle, for the majority of your cycle, but especially in the last 2 weeks of your cycle where you're under the influence of, once you ovulate, you will start to see a hormone called progesterone start to be secreted. And this is coming from the corpus luteum. The whole idea here is that your body is basically waiting for a fertilized egg. So whether or not you want children, this happens, outside of your desires, right? So progesterone is going to stimulate your appetite. She's going to disrupt your bowels. She will slow down your bowels. She has some really nice influence on our brain, like some of the neurotransmitters. In particular, the one I'm thinking of is GABA, which helps us have a better night's sleep. We're much calmer under the influence of progesterone. But it's harder to do a longer fast. Progesterone also stimulates, I think I mentioned this, stimulates your appetite. So it's nicer to be able, in those last 2 weeks of your cycle, to be able to extend your feeding window because you're naturally going to be hungrier. And this is where a lot of women might be like listening and saying, like, I don't want to eat longer. I need to keep it all I need to keep it all tight and do the 16-8 all month long. And I promise you, this is not because I'm trying to get you to gain weight. I'm not trying to sabotage your efforts. This is just what your body needs, right? Your body is creating every month. As a woman, we create a new organ. We create this uterine, this endometrial lining, again, irrespective of whether you want a child or not. So you have to respect and honor your unique physiology and the consequences of that. Like in that luteal phase, those last 2 weeks of your cycle, you're going to be hungrier. You're going to have more cravings. So to give yourself the flexibility of thought, but also flexibility in practice of the fasting to reduce, or rather to extend the eating window, to reduce the fasting time, because this is just a time where you need more food. And it's not because you're going to gain weight. Your body's literally throwing all the substrates, like all the food that you eat. The carbohydrates gets turned into glucose. The proteins go into amino acids. The fat into fatty acids and maybe ketone bodies. All those things are being thrown into the uterine lining to build it up, to thicken it up. So it's not like you're eating more and you're just gaining weight. It's your body there's a physiological need for this increased metabolic rate. So that's how I would counsel a woman to start, is like really gentle, and then in that second 2 weeks, second half of the cycle, to just kind of keep it loose, right? Like you may even need a longer feeding window than 12 hours. Like that might also be true for you as well. I think as we begin to kind of, cut the energetic cords around, like I'm failing, I'm not doing it right. You have to be able to respond appropriately to your internal environment. And that includes changing the way that you fast through your cycle.
Definitely. That is great advice. And I think for all our female listeners out there, it's so important to really just start gentle and make it work for you. Like it's your life, it's your journey, your individual journey, and take it step by step, right? Like just realizing it is a journey, not a race, and taking
That's
it
right.
slow. And then after a while, obviously you can go up with the hours if your body tells you, yes, I feel good with this and I'm used to it. But like just going in like 100% straight away is sometimes not the ideal way to go, because you can then lose the motivation quite quick, because it's a lifestyle, it's sustainable if it's done correctly. And definitely very helpful, I think, what you've just said. And I also would like to touch on, because I think this is so important as well, to talk about the eating window, right? Because this is, for me, or that's what we try and advise our users, especially female users as well, like take a gentle approach, start with 12-12 or 14-10, but really pay attention to your eating window. Like if you really make sure that you get the right nutritions in your eating window, you will probably won't have these hunger cravings, and because your body will have adapted to it, because you are nourished. And obviously if you're in a calorie if your calories are not enough, you haven't taken enough calories in, and maybe even the wrong ones as well, let's say just eating processed food and refined sugars, then obviously your body will be telling you, I need more, I need my vitamins, I need all these good stuff, what is missing. So maybe you've got some advice for our female users for creating the eating window in a positive way, what works for them, or maybe what actually worked for you as well, where you said this was something you've learned along the way, where you say if you build this into your eating window, like your fasting window was easier to get through.
Yeah, I think that when we think about constructing a meal, when we think about the macronutrients and the micronutrients, one of the things that I think is most important is thinking about how we can first prioritize protein. If you think of the word protein, if you sort of break it down, protos from the Greek first, and then it's the first nutrient. If you look at every single cell and almost every single cell in the body, there's proteins. We need protein. So for women and men, I would say that you want to be thinking about reducing, as you just said, the processed carbohydrates, the refined sugars. Even, unfortunately, there are so many sneaky sugars. Like most women, like most people will say, well, I don't put any sugar in my coffee. I don't have the white powdery stuff, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of times when you have if you order in, or if you, even like something like as simple as a tea, like there's companies, at least in North America, that have sort of been outed for like having these herbal teas. And then when you look, there's sugar, and like they deconstruct the tea bag and there's sugar in them, because sugar generally sends a message of safety to the brain, right? So when we were more, hunter-gatherers, more nomadic, finding things that were sweets were usually safe, right? So if you found like a raspberry bush, or, something, fruit tree or whatever, these are usually safe foods. And of course, we also don't necessarily have the regulation mechanisms in our digestion to make us stop having sugar. So there's actually been some really interesting literature, and I know I'm going off on a little tangent, but I think it's worth stopping here. There's been some literature that has demonstrated, some studies that have demonstrated that even when the subjects of the study didn't know that they were eating sugar, so they had numbed the tongue, numbed the oral cavity, there's sensing neurons in the gut that can tell, that will make you want a certain food. So they had given these subjects sugary foods. They had no idea that there was sugar in them, and they said, which foods would you eat again? They had given them sugary foods, bitter foods, and sort of like sugar neutral or sweet neutral foods. And there was a statistically significant, like far greater than chance, these subjects went for the sugar foods, because we have these in our gut, we have these sugar sensing almost neurons and enzymes that will send a message to the brain and say, eat more of that. It's good, right? So There's a lot of companies that obviously know that, and so they are going to sneak sugar into their food. Why? So that you'll go back and buy it again.
Of course.
So you have to be conscious of that. So a lot of people that I've worked with or that I, counsel, they'll say, oh, I don't have sugar. And it's like, okay, well, we actually have to look at the processed foods that you're having, because it's more likely than not that they have found a way, whether they've changed the name, they've changed it to some beautiful, exotic, name, or they haven't labeled it. I mean, labeling is also just another completely separate issue with food. But you have to, when you are eating whole foods, and I often say this in jest, but if you go to the grocery store, like broccoli doesn't have a label, right? It's like, you know what you're getting, it's broccoli, right? But if you get, broccoli, some sort of broccoli pasta or broccoli, whatever, broccoli may be part of it, but there's a lot of other stuff that's in there as well, right? So
Definitely.
Yeah, so just wanted to stop just at that little like food labeling and big food,
it makes totally sense. And just one comment on that. It's probably because your body as well, it senses, okay, I'm getting energy, and we obviously Correct. That's where we come from, and our body is there to survive. Like living in the times we do now, like this hasn't been the case a few hundred years ago. So our body is obviously still adapted to that. When he gets energy, he wants more of that. So I can totally refer to that.
And it's easy, right? When you have glucose, when you have, or sometimes it's, galactose, or it's fructose or sucrose, whatever, like that's really easy to create ATP. It's really easy to create energy out of that simple sugar. So let me back up now to your original question, which was, how do we structure our meals? So usually I am very much, the way that I eat now is a combination of a ketogenic. So I sort of alternate weeks of a ketogenic diet, which is more of a restricted carbohydrate diet, essentially. So there's moderate proteins, there's a higher fat content, and then I'll alternate that with higher protein, slightly higher carbohydrates. So the way that kind of works in practice is, 70-20-10. So 70% fat, 20% protein, and 10% carbohydrates is my keto week. That's usually how I structure things that week. And then when I'm having a higher protein, like when I'm cycling a higher protein, it will be, 40% fat, let's say 40% protein, and then 20% carbohydrates. And I really like this for women in terms of the application of a ketogenic diet, A, to match up with their menstrual cycle if you're in your reproductive years, but B, just adherence to healthy living. A lot of times when I have women say, oh, I've tried keto, I was able to do it for a couple of weeks and I couldn't stick with it for whatever reason. A lot of times it's because they were on keto for too long, so for a woman, we were back to kind of what we were talking about before, we need a certain amount of fat, right? So whether that's adipose tissue that we are carrying or we're getting from the diet, we need to have a certain amount of fat in order for us to have robust reproductive function. So but when you're only having fat, like when you're only doing that 70-20-10, over time, that can affect neurotransmitters. It can affect your serotonin levels. It can affect dopamine, all of these things that are involved in motivation and desire. So we tend to quit. So I like to play with the keto week and then alternate that with higher protein and higher carbohydrates. And the reason for that is when we are improving or increasing our protein consumption, one, it has a thermogenic effect, right? So it's, to break down protein, specifically if you're having meat products, it takes a lot of energy to do that. Very satiating. Protein makes you feel full. And then I will also, the other really important thing with increasing your protein, and this is very important for men and women, but particularly my women who are in their 40s and their 50s, is that when you consume enough protein, you will start a process in the body called muscle protein synthesis. And it's just what it sounds like. You're synthesizing new muscle protein. And for women, this is important for us because muscle, like our lean muscle mass, is intimately connected with our bone density. So as we age, as we go from being in our 20s and 30s, and then we move into sort of our 40s and our 50s, maintaining your lean muscle mass becomes ever more important, because if you don't have muscle mass, you will begin to lose it, right? It's that use it or lose it principle. But it also will affect your bone density. So when we now move into menopause, where we have this cessation of this cycling, you no longer are bathing your cells, your muscles and your bones in estrogen, which is, it's anabolic hormone, trophic hormone, growth hormone. You will now begin to lose muscle mass and bone density at a much higher rate than you would have if you were, in your menstrual years. So alternating these weeks of keto and then high protein, and I also bump up the carbohydrates that week too. So we go from 10% carbohydrates in week 1 to 20% in week 2, is of course carbohydrates is going to, hopefully it's a, plant-based, like it's like the sweet potatoes, or it's the green leafy vegetables, the good stuff, not the Haagen-Dazs, but like the, the vegetables, right? You're going to get an insulin spike from that, right? So when you break down carbohydrates, the substrate is glucose. Glucose, of course, is going to stimulate the beta cells in the pancreas to release insulin. And then insulin is also an anabolic hormone. It is a hormone for growth. So when you are trying to build muscle as a woman, this should be one of your top priorities. Increasing the protein is going to help you do that. Hopefully you're also resistance training in the gym, but that's, maybe a separate conversation. But when you combine the protein with the carbs, now you have this sort of synergistic anabolic effect. So you can really, and your muscles, just by sheer weight, are the biggest, glucose sink in the body. They're the biggest glucose disposal agent. Your muscles will sop up all the glucose much more so than your liver can, or any other organ or tissue in the body. So we want to be sort of alternating between these two macronutrient compositions of the diet to be able to in the first week, you're restricting your insulin, right? You're becoming more insulin sensitive by restricting the carbohydrates, and then almost allowing for that spring. You kind of clamp down on the spring in week 1, and then in week 2, you let the spring fly, right? So you have more protein, more carbohydrates to allow for those growth pathways. And what I have found with women is they're really able to keep to this week 1, week 2 rhythm for much longer than if I were to just say, okay, you're going to do keto forever. You're just going to be you're just going to be restricting your carbs forever, because it just has, for women, it just has this deleterious effect on our mood, on our sleep, on our, on menstrual cycle, all the things.
Wow. Yeah, that's like for me as well, like a lot of information there as well, what I didn't know before, especially for the female body, and it definitely makes sense. And I mean, like how does that feel for you to see all these women you are helping along with their journey? That must be an awesome feeling, right?
Oh my gosh, it's the best. It's the best feeling, because I think that, oftentimes when we look at literature, when we look at the research, it's getting better now. But really, women are often excluded from research papers. If you look, when you look at studies even on fasting, most of the studies are done on men. And then we just sort of take that and we're like, okay, well, we're little men, so we'll just do the same thing as, so there's not a lot of information in terms of how we can adapt things like fasting or nutrition or exercise to our menstrual cycle. And that's sort of my, my secret dream really with my career, is to be able to empower women right now in terms of how to understand that their hormones are actually their superpowers. And once you sort of learn the ebbs and flows of your hormonal environment, you can adapt your fasting, you can adapt your nutrition, you can adapt your exercise. And then for those women to be able to teach their daughters, right? We're not taught about our fertility in school. We're taught to fear our fertility, but we're not taught about how it works. So these women, these mothers, these aunts, these, for us to teach our daughters, our granddaughters, our nieces, what it is to be a woman, and how we can alter the way that we interact with, food, which we all have to interact with, and movement and supplementation and all of these different things.
Wow, that's a great vision, and I wish you the best of luck with that. And obviously, if I can support in any way, I would love to do that. Like, feel free to contact me. And thanks so much for joining us today, Stephanie. Like, it really was a pleasure and having you here. And I've certainly gotten so much great advice, and all the listeners in our community too. So thank you so much for the food for thought. And
thank you
coming here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm just so honored to be here. It's been a great conversation.
Definitely has. Thank you so much. And for all the listeners out there, like, fasting and holistic health should always work with you, your body, and your life. That's what we could take from today's guest, Dr. Stephanie. So thanks again for that. And if you're interested in checking out Dr. Stephanie's work, she has an amazing podcast called Better with Dr. Stephanie, as well as her book, The Betty Body. So check the link in the description for information, or the links there obviously to them. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Fasting Feel Good podcast.